Your wound is your weapon. Why the broken are best equipped to lead. Good afternoon. I want to start by telling you something that might make you uncomfortable, something that challenges everything we've been taught about leadership, about strength, about who gets to sit at the table when we're talking about real transformative change. What if I told you that the very things you've been conditioned to hide, the wounds you've been taught to bury, the struggles with abuse, depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, and PTSD that society has labeled as weaknesses are actually your greatest weapons for transformation? What if the pain you've been waiting to overcome is the exact thing that positions you to lead? I recently sat down with someone who has completely revolutionized the way I think about vulnerability and power. Her name is Lacrecia Hill, though most people call her Lou. And let me tell you something about Lou that will help you understand why her insights are so critical to this conversation. Lou is a fourth generation Spokenite who has spent over 20 years in the nonprofit sector, working with organizations like the Boys and Girls Clubs across Las Vegas, Oregon, and Spokane, and currently serving as the Community Engagement and Strategy Director at Empire Health Foundation. She's the founding board president of the Spectrum S2 LGBTQIA Center. She sits on the boards of the Inland Northwest Business Alliance, Spokane Neighborhood Action Program, and Northeast Youth and Family Services. She holds a psychology degree and an MBA. But here's what makes Lou's work so powerful, so disruptive, so necessary. She didn't build this extraordinary impact despite her understanding of trauma and vulnerability. She built it because of it. Lou has dedicated her entire career to what she calls holding space, intentionally centering the voices of those closest to the pain, those who have survived abuse, who live with depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, PTSD, those who know intimately what it means to navigate systems that were never designed for their healing. And what Lou taught me turned everything I thought I knew about leadership completely upside down. Now, let me ask you something. How many of us have been told that to lead, to make a real difference, to be taken seriously in professional spaces, we need to have it all together? How many of us have been taught that our mental health struggles, our histories of trauma, our ongoing battles with depression or anxiety are things we need to resolve, to overcome, to move past before we can step into our purpose? How many of us are sitting in this room right now or listening to this, waiting to be healed before we believe we're worthy of leading? What if that's completely backwards? What if the thing you're waiting to get past is actually the thing that makes you most qualified to create meaningful change? Here's the radical truth that Lou shared with me, and it's something that should fundamentally disrupt how we think about expertise and authority. True community transformation doesn't start with grand strategies developed in boardrooms by people who have never experienced the pain points they're trying to solve. It doesn't begin with consultants who studied poverty but never lived it, who researched trauma but never survived it, who analyzed mental health crises but never navigated one themselves. It starts with holding space, and holding space means something very specific. It means intentionally, deliberately, unapologetically centering the voices of those closest to the pain. It means recognizing that the real experts aren't the ones with the most degrees on their walls. The real experts are the ones who have lived it, the ones who are still living it, the ones who understand in their bones, in their bodies, in their lived experience what it means to survive abuse, to manage depression, to navigate the world with bipolar disorder, to calm the storms of anxiety, to carry the weight of PTSD. Think about what this means. We've been conditioned to believe that expertise requires distance, that authority comes from objectivity, that to be credible, you need to be removed from the problem. But what if proximity to pain is actually what qualifies you? What if the people best equipped to guide healing are the ones who are still in the process of healing themselves? Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Lou spent 8 years working with the Boys and Girls Clubs, moving between Las Vegas, Oregon, and Spokane, showing up every day for young people who were navigating challenges that most adults couldn't begin to understand. She worked at the Empire Health Foundation, focusing on health equity and community engagement. Then she did something that might surprise you. She spent 4 years in the cannabis industry, implementing management best practices in a sector that was emerging, evolving, finding its footing. And then she returned to Empire Health Foundation as the community engagement and strategy director. Throughout this entire journey, Lou carried her psychology degree and her MBA. But more importantly, she carried her lived experience. She carried her understanding of what it means to navigate systemic barriers. She knew deeply and personally what it felt like when trauma survivors, when people dealing with depression, anxiety, and PTSD were excluded from the very decision making processes that directly affected their lives. So she did something radical. She centered them, she held space for them, she listened to them, and she built connections, networks, systems that amplified the voices of those closest to the community's realities. The outcome, she catalyzed just communities, not perfect communities, not communities without struggle or pain or ongoing challenges, but communities where people felt seen, heard, valued, and empowered to lead from their lived experiences rather than despite them. This is what equity work actually looks like when it's done right. This is what transformation looks like when it's rooted in authenticity rather than theory. Now, let's talk about what this means for you. For those of us sitting here today thinking, I'm not ready yet, I'm still dealing with my own stuff, I'm still healing from my own abuse, I'm still managing my depression, my anxiety, my PTSD. How can I possibly help anyone else when I haven't even figured out how to help myself? Here's the truth that nobody wants to tell you, but I'm going to say it anyway. Your healing journey doesn't disqualify you from leadership, it qualifies you. Let me introduce you to Barbara, a licensed clinical social worker who works within the same ecosystem as Lou at Waters Meet. Barbara has a Bachelor of Science in Urban Planning from USC, earned back in 1999. She went on to get her Master of Social Work from Azusa Pacific in 2017 and became a licensed clinical social worker in California in 2023. She's navigated roles from housing matcher to director, always prioritizing family proximity and mental health in her work. But here's what's important about Barbara's story. She understands that data analysis and social sustainability aren't just abstract concepts you study in graduate school. They're about real people, people with real trauma, real abuse histories that have led to depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, and PTSD. People who need more than statistics and strategies, people who need someone who understands. Barbara refined her skills in active listening and creative problem solving, not in a classroom, but in the trenches. She learned that roots matter, that family ties accelerate healing journeys. She discovered that when you return to Washington to be near your niece and nephew, when you take time to go snowshoeing for your own personal resilience, you're not stepping away from the work. You're deepening your capacity for it. You're modeling what it looks like to prioritize your own mental health so you can show up more fully for others. This is what I need you to understand. Careers in nonprofits, in health equity, in community transformation thrive when we blend psychology, business acumen, and personal vulnerability. When we stop pretending that our struggles are separate from our strengths. When we recognize that turning personal pain into professional impact isn't just possible, it's the most authentic, most powerful path to creating real change. But here's where this gets even more interesting. This isn't just about individual transformation. This is about systemic change. Equity work demands cross sector collaboration. It requires youth programs talking to philanthropic organizations. It needs small businesses connecting with clinical social workers. It demands that Black leaders, that women leaders, that leaders from marginalized communities step into spaces where they've historically been excluded and say, we're not just going to participate in your systems. We're going to redesign them. We're going to center care. We're going to prioritize mental health support for vulnerable populations. And we're going to do it our way, rooted in our lived experience, informed by our pain, guided by our healing. Let me tell you about Dr. Lacrecia Foster, a family medicine physician who has been practicing in Spring, Texas for over 30 years. Dr. Foster graduated from Oklahoma State University College of Osteopathic Medicine and has spent 3 decades providing comprehensive care to patients facing chronic vulnerabilities, including mental health disorders stemming from abuse. For 30 years, Dr. Foster has shown up for patients dealing with depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, and PTSD in underserved communities. 30 years. Think about that. 3 decades of bearing witness to pain, of holding space for healing, of understanding that recovery and empowerment are inseparable. What makes Dr. Foster's story so powerful is that she didn't just treat symptoms. She understood that you can't separate the body from the mind, the physical from the emotional, the diagnosis from the lived experience. She modeled resilience for Black women in health fields, bridging the gap between personal and professional healing. She showed that you can build a 3 decade career, not by compartmentalizing your understanding of trauma, but by letting it inform every interaction, every diagnosis, every treatment plan, every moment of care. Now, I want to pause here and ask you something that I need you to really sit with. What would it look like if we stopped waiting for permission to lead? What would it look like if we stopped believing that we need to be fully healed, completely whole, perfectly put together before we can help others heal? What would it look like if we recognized that our vulnerabilities, our mental health struggles, our histories of abuse and trauma aren't things to overcome before we step into our purpose, but are actually the foundation of that purpose? Lou taught me that building resilience after trauma requires community connectors who prioritize holding space and active listening. It requires Black women professionals and all women professionals and all people from marginalized communities to lead from their lived experiences rather than despite them. It requires us to stop performing strength and start embodying authenticity. And here's what happens when we do this: when we center our vulnerabilities instead of hiding them, when we lead from our wounds instead of pretending they don't exist, we don't just change ourselves, we change entire systems. We create networks of care that didn't exist before. We build organizations that actually prioritize mental health support instead of just talking about it. We establish cross sector collaborations that work because they're rooted in real experience, not theoretical frameworks developed by people who have never lived the realities they're trying to address. Think about what Lou has accomplished through this approach. Founding board president of the Spectrum S2 LGBTQIA Center, creating space for LGBTQIA individuals in Spokane, board member of the Inland Northwest Business Alliance, bringing equity into business conversations, board member of Spokane Neighborhood Action Program and Northeast Youth and Family Services, ensuring that community voices shape community solutions, community engagement and strategy director at Empire Health Foundation, positioning health equity at the center of philanthropic work. These aren't just titles on a resume. These are platforms for amplifying voices that have been silenced. These are space where trauma survivors get to lead the conversation about healing. These are systems being redesigned from the inside out by people who understand what's broken because they've experienced the breaking. And this is what I want you to take away today. You don't need to wait until you're perfect. You don't need to wait until you've overcome every struggle, resolved every issue, healed every wound. You don't need to wait until your depression is managed, your anxiety is under control, your PTSD symptoms have disappeared, your trauma is resolved. You need to show up exactly as you are, with all your vulnerabilities, all your lived experience, all your hard won wisdom, all your ongoing struggles, and you need to hold space for others who are walking the same path. Because here's the thing that the world doesn't want you to know: the people who need you most aren't looking for someone who has it all figured out. They're not looking for someone who's perfectly healed, who's moved past everything, who can offer wisdom from a place of complete wholeness. They're looking for someone who understands, someone who knows what it's like to navigate systems that weren't built for their healing, someone who can say, I see you, I've been there. I'm still there in some ways. And I'm going to make sure your voice is centered in the decisions that affect your life. This is what true equity work looks like. It's not charity, it's not saviorism, it's not people from positions of privilege deciding what's best for communities they don't understand. It's collaboration, it's recognizing that the people closest to the pain are the people closest to the solution. It's building networks where Black leaders, where women leaders, where leaders from marginalized communities don't just have a seat at the table, they're designing the table. They're deciding who gets invited. They're setting the agenda. They're determining what success looks like. So here's my challenge to you today, and I want you to really hear this. What if holding space for your own vulnerabilities, for your own experiences with abuse, depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, or PTSD became your greatest weapon in leading change? What if the very thing you've been taught to hide, to minimize, to overcome as quickly as possible is actually the thing that positions you to create the most meaningful, most lasting, most transformative impact? I want you to do something this week. Identify one community connector, one person who's doing work that matters, who's holding space for vulnerable populations, who's centering voices that have been marginalized. And I want you to share your story with them, not the polished version, not the version where you've overcome everything and now you're here to inspire others with your triumph. Share the real version, the messy version, the version where you're still healing, still learning, still figuring it out, still struggling someday, still showing up anyway. Because that's the version that will build the just networks we deserve. That's the version that will create the systemic change we need. That's the version that will transform communities from the inside out. Lou is out there right now holding space, centering care, amplifying voices, catalyzing change in Spokane and beyond. Barbara is out there building sustainable support systems in Washington's inland Northwest, modeling what it looks like to prioritize mental health while doing the work. Dr. Foster has spent 30 years providing compassionate care in Texas, showing that longevity in this work is possible when you lead from your lived experience. And they're not doing it despite their vulnerabilities, despite their understanding of trauma, despite their proximity to pain. They're doing it because of those things, because their wounds became their weapons, because their pain became their purpose, because their healing journey became their leadership platform. The question isn't whether you're qualified. The question is, are you ready to recognize that you already are? Are you ready to stop waiting for permission and start leading from exactly where you are? Are you ready to turn your wound into your weapon? Because the world doesn't need more people who have it all figured out. The world needs you. Messy, healing, struggling, surviving, showing up any way you. The world needs your voice, your experience, your lived wisdom, your ongoing journey. The world needs leaders who understand that transformation doesn't come from perfection. It comes from proximity, proximity to pain, proximity to struggle, proximity to the communities we're trying to serve. So stop waiting. Start leading. Your wound is your weapon. Use it. Thank you.